Hello, and welcome to the Whoever Podcast, a Christian podcast for non-Christians. I'm Brian.
I'm Andrew, and today we're going to talk about Mark chapter 11, starting in verse 27. They, Jesus and the disciples, arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you the authority to do this?" Jesus replied, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me." They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will say, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say of human origin," they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things."
It cracks me up how crafty or I don't know. It's almost like a smart aleck here. I don't know. It just makes me laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the context of this is important. Jesus, he had just gone to the temple and overturned the tables and really upset the established order. I mean, he's had this pattern for his whole ministry where he's upsetting the religion and basically messing up everything the Pharisees have set up for themselves. And so the Pharisees are just like, all right, hold on a second, Jesus. Who gave you the authority to do this, right? Like, who gave you the right to do this? And Jesus answers his question with a question, which I think is just awesome.
Yeah, he basically says, "Look, I'll tell you where I get the authority to do this. Like, I'll answer that question. I'm willing to do it. But I want you to be honest with me first." And then he asks them this question: where did John's baptism come from? And if you remember from way back at the beginning of Mark, John the Baptist was someone who was sent ahead of Jesus to kind of get things ready and to tell people effectively that the Messiah was coming. And the Pharisees and the chief priests and whatever had kind of the same problem with John that they have with Jesus, which is that he's not part of the in crowd. He's leading people away from what we think they should be doing and from our power and whatever. So they didn't like him. And now that John was eventually executed by King Herod. And so now that John is gone and the people all hold that John was a prophet, Jesus says, "Well, what did you guys think? Did you think he was from heaven, or was he just a guy who was kind of, lying to people?" And they're afraid because they don't want to say, "Oh, he was we didn't like him." But they can't say, "Well, he was from heaven," because they said Jesus will say to us, "Well, then why didn't we believe him? Why didn't we get on board with what God was doing?"
Yeah, Jesus isn't just trying to be a jerk here. He's actually testing their hearts. Because the answer we all know is that Jesus has the authority to do this because he is the Son of God. Mm-hmm. But he knows that the Pharisees, they can't accept this fact because they're prideful. They're not willing to humbly say, "You know what? Maybe you are God, and maybe we were wrong." And so they're too prideful on the one hand. On the other hand, they like their position with the people. Mm-hmm. It says right here in the text that they feared the people. They were afraid that if they said, "Well, John's baptism doesn't really matter," then the people would be angry, and so they were afraid of people. So that they were proud, and they cared too much about their reputation. And so what Jesus is getting at here and what he's teaching us today is that if we really want to accept the authority of Jesus, if we really want to say, "Yes, God, you are God," we have to start from a humble place where we say, "I admit that I'm wrong." Right? We have to get rid of our pride. We have to admit that, well, I don't understand these things, and maybe I'm wrong. And we have to say, following you, God, is the only way, but it might mean that I'm going to lose popularity or I'm going to lose some of these things. And so what Jesus is doing here in these short couple of verses is he's just testing the Pharisees because he's not testing their knowledge. He's basically saying, listen, if you're too prideful and you care too much what people think, it doesn't matter what I respond with because you're not going to believe me anyways. So he's not just being competitive, he's also trying to teach them and get them to realize their own shortcomings.
Yeah, there are messages in this for us today. The first one would be to, and Brian and I would include ourselves in this, Christians who have been part of the church for a long time. If your version of Christianity, if your version of religion is one where you're kind of on the top and it provides you with a lot of perks and a lot of well-to-do attitudes and respect from people, you have to really consider what question would Jesus ask you? Would he say to you, is your heart right? Are you really following God, or are you kind of following this man-made system that you've created that benefits you? On the other hand, if you're not a part of the church, if you're, and that's who we make this for, if you're watching this saying, I'd kind of like to know who God is, but I'm not sure about the rest of it isn't what God said. The rest of the church and the mistakes that we've made are not what God said. God said, I'm here to love you and to accept you and to call everyone humbly into this community where everyone sort of fits and belongs, not a system where some people get to be the good ones and everyone else has to be not.
Right. And it's not necessary, if you are a Christian, you find yourself with those perks or whatever, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you're willing to give those up. Mm-hmm. If the Pharisees would have said here, maybe it was just a human, or, if they would have not feared the people, I think this would have been a very different conversation. It's not necessarily bad to be wealthy or to be on top of a pyramid, so to speak, as long as you're willing to say, I don't need to stay up here. It's okay. Maybe God put you in a position of influence for a reason. But we have to hold that position of influence, that popularity, or that pride, whatever it is, has to be below the authority of God, not at or above it. And that's what Jesus is getting at here. I think that's probably about it for this one. But if you have any other questions, you can feel free to comment below or reach out to one of us. And until then, we'll catch you next time.
Yep.
Bye.